Thank you for having me. What a lunch. And don't miss the churro. They're hiding in the back. They're quiet. These young ladies here pointed it out. Worth the walk. So yeah, my name is Bill Bodnar. I help run a company called Tabrasi. Anybody here a Mortgage Market Guide? All right, so I've been running that product, I can't believe it, for a little over 23 years. So we've seen a few cycles. And what we're going to do today is, anybody like golf? I'm a golfer. I watch it, play it, eat it, love it. To talk about the markets, to tell a story, put a little golf theme to it. So we're going to talk about the economy, interest rates, all that stuff. And as we go through this, I want you to, let me see, is this going to work? There we go. As we go through this, we're going to talk about where we see things going, but it isn't about prognosticating on rates. Every Friday, your realtors, that's their Monday. They want to know what's happening, where are rates going, why, and what's next. And the beauty about being able to speak to this in simple terms, you're real time. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what's happening over the next 3 days. This story could be ancient history, right? And so there's always something relevant to say. And one of the things that I've heard, I'm speaking at this big, credit union event in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, and they're having me do this presentation, winning by reading, understanding, and sharing market knowledge. And one of our subscribers, not too far from here, said, if you know what's going on, if you can talk to it, if you can talk about rates, talk about where things are going, you don't have to talk about it. It's kind of like a doctor, right? You go to a doctor, gives you all this great information, you're not going to chisel them on price, right? So think about it as we kind of go through this. And we'll definitely want to take some questions on the end as well. And so here we go. That's our boy. And there'll be some equal, I criticize people equally. He gets the lion's share, not because his rate cuts and hikes influence, obviously, mortgage rates, but, their policy influences inflation, the labor market. They look at things that are forward-looking, backward-looking, sometimes, as we're seeing right now, a little late to the party on things. So we're going to talk through it. But believe it or not, November, we kind of forget, COVID, it's already 4 years. But November will be 3 years since the famous transitory remark. Everybody know that one? That gem? Inflation's high nature would be short-lived. It's transitory. Proved incorrect, depending on your definition. And so we're still living, as a mortgage professional, we're still living through this same movie that we were back then. 3 things. 1, where's the economy headed? 2, where is inflation headed? And 3, what the heck is the Fed going to do about it? And think about it. Where we are today, it's exactly what, is it going to be a recession? What about inflation? Is the Fed cutting 25 or 50? This is 3 years later. We're still watching this. So if you wonder why you should tell your clients and your partners about why rates are volatile, that's it. We don't know where things are. We don't know if they're cutting 50. We don't know if they're cutting at all. What if inflation pops back up and reemerges, right? There's a lot. We're going to talk through it right now. So getting on, this thing's a little, anybody like Game of Thrones? I'll just leave it up there. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I love Game of Thrones. Even the new one's kind of cool. Karen and I enjoy that show. And AI is really something. I mean, AI is going to change a lot of things. I think it's going really fast, and it's going to settle in before we figure out the winners and losers. But from a marketing standpoint and just stuff that you could do on the fly, in 10 seconds I said, hey, ChatGPT, please write a brief, simple introduction as Jerome Powell, as if you were in Game of Thrones. And they came up with this. I think the best one is the Grandmaster of Guesswork. That is really him, right? So before we get to the back 9, we got to talk about the front 9. Let me just make sure that's good. Okay. So talk about the front 9. Where were things as it relates to over the last couple of months? Like, where did things end? And we learned that core inflation remains sticky. And by the way, there's still components of inflation which are really sticky. We watched the first quarter of growth, GDP, surprisingly decline, right? The third quarter of last year was 5%. The fourth quarter of last year was 3.5%. The first quarter is 1.4%, so things are slowing down. Unemployment rate, 4%. We had a 7% mortgage. That's not fun. And we're going to talk a lot about debt. Debt's a problem, been a problem, continues to be a problem. This thing's a little sticky. There we go. So that's the master's scorecard. Here's what we're going to riff through. We're going to go through the Fed, inflation, GDP, labor market, recession. We're going to encourage you to look around. People are going to tell you things as they are, and you can look around, scratch your head a little bit, and say, maybe they're not so good. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, I want to talk about housing. There are hazards out there that we're going to watch, and we obviously are going to end with what we see rates doing. hang on a second. Typically, if you hit the ball in the water, for you, those that are not golfers, you don't celebrate. Unless, of course, it's like a $5 Pro V, then I might give myself a little cheer, right? So what do I mean by this slide? Bad news is finally bad news. And what I mean by that is up until June, every little bout of bad economic news we received, all it meant was the Fed's not going to hike rates. Well, the good news for us in mortgage is that ship has sailed. There is no more hiking rates. Now it's about how much you're going to cut and when you're going to cut. So this is a different kind of world we're in. And this was a big moment for us because even this spring, when inflation was moving higher, we got some bad economic news and it was like, okay, crap, well, inflation's still high. It means at least they're not hiking. Well, the good news is the cuts are coming. And this is a big thing for us because it does help with rates. When we look through all the stuff that we're going to talk over the next half hour plus, this is kind of the punchline. Beautiful scenery, La Jolla. Fed cuts are coming, right? Bad news is good news, and bad news is finally bad news, which is important to us. Economic growth is slowing, finally. Remember Jamie Dimon, a lot of smart guys out last year saying, yeah, we're going to have a recession. He called it an economic hurricane, Dimon, right? Economic hurricane, we're going to have 5% 30-year mortgage, none of which happened. So it tells you, forecasting is not easy, and there's some smart folks that were really missing it. But finally, economic growth is slowing, and finally for us in mortgage and housing, that's a tailwind. Inflation's moving lower. It is absolutely, we're going to show it. The labor market is less tight. We're going to talk about where we are right now and some real-time nuggets for you over the next 36 to 72 hours. But this improvement's going to be slow and steady, and the housing future's so darn bright, right? There's so much great stuff to be excited about. So let's talk about the Fed. Over the last few months, we're going to go through just the last few meetings. And back in May, because bad news was finally bad news, we learned we're not hiking. And we're not cutting, but we are going to slow the balance sheet. Now, the balance sheet reduction, that quantitative tightening, just to remind everybody where we were, back in February of 2020, when the bond market was driving off a cliff because this pandemic was going to put 40 million people out of work, the bond market was going crazy. I remember secondary markets calling me, oh my God, the mortgage-backed securities are moving in 100 basis point moves. It was crazy. So the Fed came in, did a great job. They stabilized the bond market. That was their initial job, right? It wasn't, hey, I want to give Utah a refinance bonanza and a housing boom. That was not what they did. But what they did, like they do often, they overcooked it. And they did it way too long, and they bought all these bonds. They subsidized mortgage rates. That's why I got a lot of folks out there sitting on, sub 4% mortgages. So now they're doing the opposite. Essentially, they bought all these bonds because the idea was there was going to be people going in, people needed to buy them. Someone had to buy the bonds, so they were the buyer of last resort. Now they're slowing down this quantitative tightening, which is essentially they're taking some of the money as these bonds mature, and they're buying more bonds, right? And so that slowing did give us probably 25 basis points in relief in mortgage rates. So they did help us with that move. This is a fun slide. And by the way, I'll share this with the team here and this slide deck, because I think there's some good nuggets in here real time that you can spin up in conversations even this afternoon. So the Fed is not a great forecaster of economic activity. And they grace us with their forecast every 90 days. And this is in June. So I'm not talking about June like 2 decades ago. I'm talking about June like weeks ago. And what they do is you can see here in March there's a projection, and it says 2.1 GDP. And then above it, you can see here it says 2.1. So beneath was March, and then in June is the number above it where they see things going, and they adjust it, right? So in June, they're going with 2.1. The unemployment rate, they said we're going to be 4%? No. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to stick at 4%. Core PCE, that's the Fed's favorite gauge of inflation. We should know this one because whenever you hear the media or people saying we need inflation to move sustainably towards 2%, it's that number. It's now 2.6. They said in March it was at 2.6. In June they said 2.8. And then because inflation was going to be higher, growth was going to be fine, and unemployment rate's not moving, we're not going to cut rates 3 times, we're going to cut it once. Now you know the old song, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but 0 out of 3 sucks. And they missed it on many levels. And this is in 60 days, not 60 years, 2 months. And remember, these folks have 500 PhDs. They have in excess of $1 billion of resources. And that is what they came up with in the last 60 days. And that's why our rate sheets are volatile. That's why it's tough to tell a story, because the most important monetary authority on the planet is issuing stuff like this. So let's break it down. Unemployment rate. Anybody know what it is right now? 4.3. So in 60 days after this forecast, it's already up to 4.3. I'm going to talk about unemployment. It's pretty funny. March inflation. Core PCE, they said it's going to be 2.8. It's already 2.6 and threatening to move lower still, right? We're going to talk about that. And the Fed funds rate's the best one. So now they said, we're not going to cut 3 times, we're cutting once. You know what the markets are pricing. It's as many as 4. So they're missing it everywhere. So we need to know this and share with our clients, and instant credibility and why it's important. So let's talk about July. So in July, this is now weeks ago. Why is this one important? Because tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we're going to get the minutes from that meeting. And that meeting was when Fed Chair Powell kind of opened the door to a Fed rate cut, but he also likes to speak out of both sides of their mouth. He said, well, you know, inflation's still there. We need some more good readings, quote unquote. But if we see unexpected weakness in the labor market, we may have to do something. Well, we're going to talk about that unexpected weakness that I've always been highlighting. And listen to them, because they say things, and it's not by accident. It is by design to move the markets, right? So follow what they say very carefully. By the way, when they say we don't need to be 100% focused on inflation, what do they mean? They have 2 mandates. One is price stability, and the other is unemployment, right? Maximum employment. So they're now focusing on unemployment, and they should be. Anybody remember Caddyshack? That scene in the pool, remember, sucking in their gut when the young lady's walking around? So there is a lot of pressure for the Fed to get in the pool. By the way, it's a golf theme, right? There's a lot of pressure for the Fed. Why? Everybody on the planet is cutting rates. And what's interesting, everybody on the planet hiked after us. So think about this. We were the first one to hike, and we're going to be the last one to cut. Every other central bank hiked after and cutting before. Why? One reason. We all had the supply chain problem. We all had oil. We all had that problem. But what they didn't have around the globe was this overly generous fiscal policy showering the earth with cash, right? And that is at odds, and we're going to talk about it more, what the Fed's doing. The Fed should have been gone a long time ago. Their job is to fight inflation. The other job was stimulative. They were completely at odds. And that's not me saying it. It's even central bankers saying, and they use the term, you could Google it, we're diverging, meaning you go figure out what you got to do, we're cutting, right? That's because they had a different source of inflation. Same inflation, but not the crazy inflation because of all the money we spent. Okay, higher for longer. Everybody know what this is? Your clients should know this. Your partners should know it. What's funny is the media throws this out there like it's common knowledge. Higher for longer simply means the Fed brings up the terminal rate, right? When the Fed stops hiking rates, that's the terminal rate, and they want to keep the terminal rate there higher for longer, right? The idea is we're going to squeeze demand out of the economy. We're going to crush inflation, and we're going to elevate unemployment. It's all going to work out perfectly, and we're going to have a soft landing, right? So with that said, these are some of the last scenarios. On average, higher for longer is about 8.5 months. So after the last rate hike, about 8.5 months over the long term. You could look in 2008. Anybody around in 2008? I lived through that mess. Wait a minute. Hold on a second. One more time. Who was here in 2008? Okay, thank you. It was a bigger group. I was like, come on. So it's a big group, and so we lived through that. And remember that good time? That was 14.6 months. A couple weeks ago, we just eclipsed a year. So we're into this thing now approaching 13 months. So we're getting long in the tooth. The cuts are coming, friends. How and when and what variety? We're going to find out a little bit this week, right? So this is the CME Fed Watch tool. You should write it down. You can access it. You should share it. Why? Look in the upper top of the screen. By the way, this is a beautiful screen, one of the best. And you can see at the top, September, November, December, January. This is September. And this was so crazy. I was in Vegas speaking at the Originator Connect event just last week. And last Monday, there was a 55% chance of a 50 basis point cut. So the way you read this, you can see over here at the top, it says the current range of the Fed funds rate is 525 to 550. There's a 55% chance last week that it goes to 475 to 5. And when you add them together, there's a 100% chance that you get a 25 basis point cut. So, but the difference is, in 1 week, it's now 25% chance on the 50 and 75. So if you're a betting person, you should bet heartedly right now that we're going to get a 25 basis point cut in September. But we're going to walk through it. There's some other news that's coming that could shake things up. Here's one, inflation. So as we go through this story, this is the Fed's favored gauge of inflation. This is a real mouthful. The Core Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, PCE, core because you take out food and energy. I guess no one uses it, so you don't have to think about it. It's volatile, right? That was a joke. And we'll go to the other side, and let's just talk about where we are. So you can see here we're at 2.63, and we're going to get a number another week or so, right? But look where it was, mid-fives. When they say move sustainably towards 2%, I'm a simple guy. That looks like it's moving sustainably. It looks like it's dropping like a rock. No one can confirm it. No one tells you. Good luck getting the Fed to kind of figure this out. So I'm just kind of making my own assumption. This is going the right way, right? It is kind of flatlining, but you can see where inflation's been over the course of history. And don't say you can't have an inflation recession with low inflation, because remember, these gray bars are inflation. Or, I'm sorry, recessions. So you can have a recession with low inflation. But that's an important chart because that's in a couple weeks. We're going to get that number. Oh, this is a good one. I know, I'm told we're all divided. This country's deeply divided. One thing I can tell you where we're all aligned, we hate paying more for crap. Inflation really does stink in a lot of levels. And so this is inflation going back to World War II. And again, it does make a difference where you sit. Like, people are going to have their own little axe to grind. But you hear people say inflation goes down. No, it doesn't. Inflation going down is deflation, right? Prices are outright declining. And only one time since World War II has it gone down, in the middle of the Great Recession, where things were really, really weird. And what I can tell you wholeheartedly is one thing we don't want in mortgage and housing is deflation. Anybody see what's going on in China? It's in the headlines this morning. And it could, there are ideas that this could be a problem for the globe. So what's happening in China is fascinating. It is the polar opposite of what we're going through. They have a gazillion homes and nobody wants them. Here in the United States, we have no homes and everybody wants them, right? So we don't want their problem, because here's how it works. Hey, Karen, I want to buy a home. She shows me the house, it's $400,000. Wow, it's great. You ready to go? No. Why, Bill? Because if I wait until next month, I'm going to get it for $390. And if I wait another month, I might get it for $375. Prices are deflating. Where here, we're chasing prices. They're chasing them the other way. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And they're doing everything. The government is involved in China, as of today, literally dropping the floor out of prices, and they're buying new homes in an effort to sop up supply. It's a complete disaster. So let's not hope for any deflation. But now that I've digressed, let's talk about inflation. So we want little inflation, 2%, right? That's what the Fed looks for. And you could see over time, just a nice steady line. And then over here, you get this little kind of off trend. See that? Little spike. That was the 70s. I lived through, I was a youngster, but I lived through it. It was ugly. And then we grow, little inflation. And then you see this one? That little nice spike? That spike represents a 2-year, 18% wallop across the board, right? That was painful. And so while, yes, we're still growing, inflation's not coming down, we're growing, but we're disinflating. We're growing more slowly. So the 3% is now on top of the other 18. That's why, you go over 3+ years at over 20%. It's painful, and that's why it's probably one of the biggest topics of people today. We could forecast inflation, and there's probably some good stories. I think we've been quite fortuitous. Again, I'm a simple guy. I look at what's gone on over the last few months. Beginning of the year, I told you inflation was hot. This is 1 year of inflation. Actually, a year and, 1 year, and it's a little dated. That last thing's, it's actually the same. It's running at 2.9. So this whole thing is 2.9% if you add these up. But look what happened in the beginning of the year. This was over 4/10, 3/10. But then we got a little fortuitous. All of a sudden, inflation disappeared. We had a zero. Zero. See any zeros in there? Hasn't been a zero in a long time. And it gets better. What a great movie. Then we get deflation. Prices outright declined in June. Pretty amazing. That was all the yard sales at the department stores trying to unload inventory, right? Prices outright declined. Because remember, shelter makes up 70, 90%, depending on which reading you want, of this inflation. So what's going to happen? This is August. This is going to get replaced in early September. So early September, we're going to get the August reading for CPI. This is 0.5. That's a 6% annualized inflation rate. This is going to drop out. So now you can tell your clients, inflation might be On CPI, 2.6%. Hasn't been there since like the middle of the pandemic, right? So inflation is going the right way. The worries that we have, you got some low numbers here. We worry about, could there be a second round? We're gonna talk through it, but inflation is coming down. What's odd is that inflation's biggest proponent is our world. It's housing, shelter, rent, even away accommodations outside the house. Those are the three things. I'm hitting you with a lot. I definitely want to take some questions after. But even if you don't want to follow it all and you want one nugget, just one nugget to take with you, tell your clients, tell your partners, if you want to know what's happening with rates, look what's going on with oil. Oil is a barometer of what's going on economically. If prices are going up, obviously supply has to do a lot with it, but it also means demand's there, the economy's moving along, it's inflationary, it's really bad for bonds, and that's why rates go higher. The opposite is true. Look what's happening. China's a disaster. I mean, what's happening in China is really bad. It's not getting talked about enough. That's one of the reasons why oil at the pump is going at $72 a barrel, 74. It can't get above 80. Let's hope it doesn't, because it goes to 90, things start getting funky for us once again. So look at how they ebb and flow together. The blue line is oil, and look at how they go up together, and then they go down. Look at the far right of the chart, almost moving in lockstep, oil and mortgage rates. So even if you don't want to follow all this, follow oil. It's an easy thing for your clients, your partners, members to kind of go along with you. When I talk about different government folks, I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. This is our Treasury Secretary. And remember, how the world works here, the economy, you have monetary policy and you have fiscal policy. And fiscal policy is what comes out of administration and the Treasury Department. So back in October, and to her credit, remember I told you earlier, we were growing in the third quarter at 5%, which was a crazy growth rate, right? Some of it was fueled by things that were short-natured, but it was 5%. So she said back then, surging bond yields are due to a strong economy, not the growing deficit. Now, remember, back then, it was crazy. Like the 10-year note was 5%, mortgages were 8%. I mean, I was looking around kind of like, what do you want to do next? Because this is not going to last much longer. 8%, you can't sell homes at 8%. Another takeaway, look at how it stopped right there. Big, fat, round numbers really act as ceilings of resistance and support. We hit 8% on mortgages, that was the end. We hit 5% on a 10-year note. We went past 5% for about 12 seconds, right? Now I'm looking, if you want to look at the next one, I'm looking at 4%, right? I'll jump into rates in a little bit. But she said this, it's, the yields going high are due to a strong economy, not the growing deficit. And so if you saw Jurassic Park, that big pile, that's what I think of it, because it is the debt. Debt is a problem, because you can't say the great thing about today's day and age, 50 years ago, you could really get away with, they probably did get away with murder a lot, but you can get away with a lot and not have to be held accountable. Now you can't say anything is a record. So there you are, 5 months ago says this, 6 months ago, and she says this maybe about a month and a half ago. Well, the higher path of rates boosts the need to lift revenue. So wait a minute, you just told us that the economy's so darn strong, we can afford the higher rates, that's why they're high. But wait, now we need to lift revenue. I thought it was strong. This is a way of saying, get ready, folks, taxes are coming, right? Because we're not strong enough. That's the tax policy being interjected. That's how we're going to pay for the shortfall. Well, that'll be good luck. Now, this is Jerome Powell, right? And on the other side is Janet Yellen. They're at odds. He's trying to stomp down inflation, slow the economy, and on the other side is Janet Yellen with a shovel, shoveling cash all over the economy. Pick what you want. And here's how crazy it is. It took us 236 years to accumulate $12 trillion in debt, most of it after 2020. We've taken on $12 trillion since the pandemic. 236 years, and we did it in 4. That's how, it's mind-boggling. And they throw around trillions, like, trillion. A trillion, another way of saying it, is a million. It is a crazy, crazy, crazy amount of money. And so we don't have a lot to show for it. We're going to walk through where the economy is right now, and you say, wow, we spent $12 trillion. We shouldn't be that unhappy about the economy. You give my mom $12 trillion, she's going to hold one heck of a party. It's going to be unbelievable. We're going to be pretty darn happy. So the fact that we're not that happy about the economy after spending $12 trillion, Whew. Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? So let's talk about the labor market. One thing I could tell you, write it down for your realtors, jobs buy homes. I know we want low rates, but it can't be at the expense of unemployment. Unemployment ticks up, things change really differently for us, right? Because, I can go again and go to Chad. Hey, he says, Bill, you ready to go? You want to buy this home? All of a sudden I get a note or a little rumor that, job headcount's being reduced. I can't buy a home or even think about buying a home if I'm losing my job or in fear of losing my job. So let's hope that the Fed's endeavor to create unemployment, because that's what this whole thing is. Let's get a little bit of unemployment. Let's slow down the economy. That will tamp down prices and all this crap's going to work out. Well, the way unemployment works is kind of like me in my last couple meals with my friends Chad and Nate. It doesn't stop. Like once you start eating at the buffet, it goes like back there and I had to hit the churros. That's how that's unemployment. Once the unemployment ticks up, it doesn't just go from 3.8 to 4% and just relax. It continues on. I'm going to show you. So this is concerning. It's probably one of the bigger concerns, and it's why you hear the recession fears kind of bubbling up right now within the economy. So, a couple months ago, this was in July, reporting for June, 206,000, every month there were these crazy numbers, big numbers. But then very nicely, they downwardly revised. Anybody see that? Anybody see that? So we're getting downwardly revised headline numbers every month. So you get the headline number. This is the one that's in the media. This is the only one you see. The report is gigantic. There's a household survey. There's the employment survey. There's so many numbers. They talk about one number, 200,000. Go ahead, go back to whatever you were doing. But you dig into the details, like, And I'm a simple guy. I look at this number, and it was always kind of, like I'm saying, it's not 206,000. And especially if you look over the last 18 months, every headline number has been downwardly revised. At some point, it doesn't make a difference where you sit politically. You have to look and say, this is math. I mean, what's the methodology? How do you get to that? Maybe it needs to be readjusted. And they're going to readjust it tomorrow. Because tomorrow, very, very interesting, we are going to get comes from the quarterly census. And Bloomberg was out talking about it, that there's going to be a large revision to that headline number going from April of last year till March of this year. Now, the bond market knows it. Bond market's not stupid. It's the smartest person in the room. But what the bond market doesn't know is how big is it going to be. And get ready. The numbers that they're throwing around, they're going to be downwardly revised anywhere from 300,000 to Goldman Sachs thinks it could be 1 million. So imagine all the jobs we've created. There's a chance that they could be 1 million less tomorrow morning. Now if it comes in, now what we don't know is what the bond market, how it's going to react. But I can tell you that, because it doesn't know, if it comes in at 300,000, that might be less bad. But if it comes in at 1 million, you're going to hear that recession stuff come bubbling up, and that could be the thing that kind of gets yields going our way in a meaningful way, because it's a wild card, right? And why do I say that? Because if you're following this stuff, there's a number that comes out every week called initial claims. Simple number, and it comes out every week. It's not like some mystery. Every week, it's basically people that file for first-time unemployment benefits, right? The very first, I just lost my job, I'm filing first time. The number the other day missed by 15,000, which is like nothing. It's like a sneeze, and the bond market yields shot up. Remember, we went from 366 to 4% in a week. Why? Because less recessionary fears. If this goes sideways tomorrow, it could be very, very bond and mortgage positive. You got to watch it carefully, right? So here's the things that I was watching. So full-time workers, right? You sell mortgages. I think I want someone that's gainfully employed, right? You got a full-time job? Yes. Okay, good. Well, back in July, this was reported in August. Remember, we had that jobs report that showed 206,000 jobs. But over here, 133,700,000 people working full-time out of our 380 million people. So let's just call it 134 million. The problem I have, January of last year, a whopping 18, 19 months ago, we had 132.7. So you're telling me that we've only put on 1 million full-time jobs in the last 18 months. I'm no mathematician quick, but you divide 18 into 1 million, that is not a lot of full-time job growth. You need 100,000 plus just to mop up immigration, people entering the labor force like my kids. It's not a great number. So these are the things I was watching. Now, by the way, I'm a simple guy too. Right? I'm a simple guy. I like to go like BC. I like pre-COVID. What did we look like before COVID? Because COVID created a lot of dislocations. Before COVID, 130, let's call it 131 million. So we put on roughly 2.5 million jobs in over 4 years. Now you divide that into 48 plus. It's not a big number. So no, we have not created 15 million jobs. No, we haven't created 9 million jobs. We've created a lot less, and it may be less still when the numbers come in tomorrow with this BLS revision. Now the other thing that had me concerned was the multiple job holders, right? And I'm building a story because when you're watching, you want to see like, why are you keeping rates so high? We know we need relief badly. These are reasons, the reason why I'm bringing this up is we need relief so badly, and you wonder what the heck is the Fed looking at, right? So you have 8.4, let's call it 8.5 million people working multiple jobs. Do you know why you work multiple jobs? Do you think it's because you want to? It's probably because you have to, right? So 8.5 million, that's a lot of people. It's a record. So if 8.5 million people are working multiples and you're not creating full-time, that's not very good. And then finally in January, we got this number in August. Finally, we get one jobs report, which actually started to make sense on the surface. It came in low, and the unemployment rate ticked up. It came in like 114,000 or something, but the unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3, and that's the important number, because I'll tell you why in a second. But the other things I was watching are these. Hires. Everybody's telling us how great the labor market is, and I'm questioning, I'm like, this is the St. Louis Fed. If you're not using the St. Louis Fed, I know people put infographics and a lot of stuff out there. This is really nice, easy stuff. Gray lines of recessions. Hiring is pre-pandemic. We all know you got to think like a business person. Tell your clients. First thing we do is we stop hiring. Then the next thing we do, you don't want to fire anybody. We got to start cutting hours, put some temp. Hey, you grab hours here, grab here. We're going to try to get through this time. If conditions persist, then you have to reduce headcount. We have gone through this movie. This is backward looking. Like, this is telling me that the economy is already probably a bunch worse because hires are it. If I'm not hiring, you're not putting on jobs. And then the other one, remember during the pandemic, I love during the pandemic, we had the quiet quitting. Remember quiet quitting? People working like 3 jobs and all that crap? That's over. Quiet quitting was over here. Remember that? No one, there was nobody quitting. Everybody's quitting, right? They were all quitting, jumping around. Why? Because you can get more pay. It was crazy. We're now at pre-pandemic levels. You don't quit if you can't find a job, right? So the hires are down, the quits are down, the full-time jobs are not there, the multiple job workers are there. And now we're going to get into unemployment. You could see, again, the gray lines are recessions. You could see it happens when unemployment is low. So I agree that you can't really have a meaningful unemployment with 4.3, but it's not 4.3, okay? It's 4.3 off a low level. You hear this rule? I made this for you folks because it gets thrown around. No one, we triggered this at the last jobs report. It's really simple. It's the SOM rule. The SOM rule is a simple economic indicator used to help identify the start of a recession. It's named after economist Claudius SOM. Here's how it works. If the unemployment rate rises by a half a point or 0.5 or more from its 12-month low, this is a strong signal that a recession might be starting. Do you know how strong it is? Any baseball fans? No? Yeah? Well, you know what batting 1,000 is? It's never missed, okay? So unless it does something weird this time, this is telling us we're either entering, or already in a recession. And here's unemployment. Back in July of last year, 3.5. We're now 4.3. It's up 0.8. And as I said earlier, like me at the buffet line, once it starts, it doesn't stop, right? So this isn't going from 4.3, going to hang around, right? What's going to change? A 25 basis point cut? Right? You can almost see the problem that the Fed has. And that's why people are saying, that one guy, like one of the officials, right before the Fed meeting in July said, I've changed my position, the Fed should cut tomorrow. And then he said, no, we're not doing it, we're waiting. I forgot, I think it was Dudley or one of these guys said, they should be cutting tomorrow. And so there's a lot of speculation that the Fed is behind the ball. I encourage you to look around. I talk about the need to lift revenue here. Look around because, we're all smart folks. And I think to bring this information to people, you could make it very simple for them to understand. I'm a simple guy. If Starbucks now has to pair up my $5 cup of coffee with a biscuit, something's wrong. You know what's wrong? Their foot traffic is down. McDonald's, Wendy's, we were talking about it at dinner last night. They're all in these $5 wars. The consumer is on fumes. fumes. And the consumer makes 2/3 of the economy. So you start building your case because it's all coming our way, folks. Believe me, this is a good story. It sounds like all doom and gloom, but it is going to help us. But this is what's fascinating. Topgolf, 8% year-over-year decline in sales. They want to sell the thing. It's a mess. I mean, I know it's not real golf. It's get up there silly, but the idea that I'm going to go get a martini, a pizza, and spend $50 on balls for a couple hours, that's over. People aren't doing it, right? They're tapped out. Forgive me if one of you guys are driving this one. That is one ugly-ass car, ain't it? I think it's called an Aztec. Right? So I Googled ugly cars, and this thing came up, and it was a gem. So if retail sales were a car, right? So retail sales is us. We are a spending nation, right? If we stop spending, we stop growing. Crap hits the fan really, really quickly. And the way it works, real retail sales, is you take retail sales, the number, and you bump it up against CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and it gives you what's left, or what are we really buying? Because are we buying more, or are we just paying more? Okay? And this is really illuminating, and I think you're going to find this fascinating. No one talks about it. No one talks about it, and it's like the Psalm rule. It's like 100%. So if we don't get a recession, you're going to look back and say, wow, Bodnar was wrong. And not only was I wrong, because I don't even know what it will be, but it's going to defy a lot of indicators that have been batting 1,000. So here we are. We're buying, we're buying, we're buying, we're buying. Then we flatline. This flat spot means we're not buying more, we're just paying more. We're actually buying less goods, and inflation's eating away at me, right? And then over here, we do it again. We're buying, we're buying, we're buying. Flatline, recession. Now look what's happening here. We're buying, we're buying, we're buying. It's gone sideways to lower. Real retail sales peaked in April of 21, over 3 years ago. It's been sideways to lower. Combine that with all the other things that we're seeing, right? That's the consumer. That means they're out of gas. And by the way, you don't have to be a whiz kid. You know how much credit card debt's out there? It's like over 6,000 for 100 million. I almost fell off the chair. Over 100 million. We only have 380 million people. 100 million people have $6,000 in credit card debt. That's insane. It's crazy. And you wonder, they're doing this so, yeah, they're not spending credit cards to go to Topgolf. All that's over, right? It's all over. So this is another good chart for you guys. Anybody know Rob Chrisman? Rob? He's a buddy of ours, and I've spoken with him at different credit union and mortgage banking events, and I did a podcast with him recently with Rich Swabinski at the TMC, whatever that was, and we talked about a recession. And he said, well, it's been so long, it's the longest yield curve inversion ever, it's probably going to be wrong. I'm like, why? He had no answer. But then I shared this chart, and he had a different approach. So this is a really good chart for you, because I think you're going to hear this now front and center. This is a really good nugget, because this is real time happening today. We're living through it. Because a yield curve inversion, real simply, is 2-year notes are yielding more than a 10-year. It's upside down, right? If you're going to lend money, I'm going to lend it out 10 years. There's opportunity risk, there's inflation, all this stuff. I need to be paid more. So the fact that it's upside down is the bond market telling us, wait, hang on, something's weird. This is not right. Rates are too high, right? This thing's got to come down. But it lasted. We threw a lot of money at the place, right? Fed kept short-term rates low, higher for longer. That's part of it. But what's interesting is the recession comes after the yield curve disinverts. So once the bond market gets normal and the 10-year note goes above the 2, that's when you could set your watch that the recession's coming. And you could smell it. It's happening right now. In fact, 2 weeks ago on a Monday at 7:42 in the morning, it disinverted for about 12 seconds. And then, all of a sudden, it got overcooked. So we didn't disinvert yet, but when it does, you'll remember this little talk here at Zions. Is it Zions? Zions, there you go. So here's how it goes. Inversion, disinverts, recession. You can imagine back then. Remember George Clooney in The Perfect Storm, right? The sun's out, the last 2 minutes of the movie. We're going to make it, no recession. And the wave came and pounded them. They probably said, yeah, no recession, and then the recession comes. Look at here again. Inversion, disinverts, recession, happens again, and look what's happening right now in real time. The deepest inversion in the history of our country, the longest inversion in the history of our country, and it is now going to disinvert any moment. And you can see what's going to happen, right? What if the Fed cuts 50 basis points? It's disinverted. And what comes with the 50 basis point cut? Oh, crap. Why are you cutting 50? You weren't cutting, now you're cutting 50? Something's really bad. So that's what we're watching. So I'll send this chart to to the folks, and you can use it. And this is proof positive. This is proof positive. Blue line is the Fed. The red line is that yield curve inversion I just showed you. So you can see where the Fed's activity is driving this and how they're always late to the party. So back in 1990, here's the peak. The higher for longer. They're saying the same crap back then. Then all of a sudden they're cutting. And then they get a recession. Oh, shit, we missed it. Right? And then over here, hike, peak. Now they're cutting. They're cutting into the recession. Late to the party. They do it again over here. They're cutting into the recession. Look at how high we are. Look how high we are. You can almost smell it coming. They're going to start cutting, and it's going to be too late. And this is a perfect example of showing the Federal Reserve being reactive as opposed to kind of proactive, right? Make sense? All right. So the recession, we talked about that. But let's talk, so there's probably a really reasonable chance. You can hear me talking to it. And I just did a call with, do you know Guild Mortgage? Anybody here, Guild? Yeah, so I did a call with David Batney the other day for builders and a group. And I kind of borrowed this chart from him because I thought it was terrific because we're aligned. I mean, the idea that there's not going to be a recession, I've seen a lot of redefining over the last 4 years. Maybe they'll call it something like an economic slowdown or something. It's not going to feel good. I can tell you that. It's not going to be perfect. We don't know what kind of variety it's going to be. We don't know how the government's going to help save us from it, but something's got to happen. It's a combination of lower rates without the threat of recession, without unemployment going up too high. But I do want to go back to that unemployment because here's the other thing I want to show you real quick. As I mentioned before, what I do worry about, is the Fed's goal is price stability and maximum employment. We've already seen the unemployment rate rise from 3.5 to 4.3. You can see the recessions. Look at the spikes. Whoops. There we go. Look at the spikes during those recessions, all the gray areas. So when I'm saying like me at the buffet, it doesn't stop, it really doesn't stop. And folks, it would be the worst scenario like I mean, it'll help housing a little bit because it'll take some people out of the market. I hate to say that. It would take some of the bidding out, right? It's crazy some of the things I hear going around the country. I would give up 1% in interest rates for a recession, or I'd give up 1% in interest rates for a 1% uptick in unemployment. It'll be a give and take, but you can see how fast it moves higher from very, very low levels. And so I do worry about it because we need jobs to buy homes. But here's the punchline. So now you tell a client, yeah, so Bill Bodnar, I think he's full of crap, but he does say we're going to get a recession or something close to it. No, Mr. and Mrs. Borrower, you should not wait to buy a home. Even if you purchased a home at the worst possible time, at the peak of the housing crisis, 9 years later you were made whole. If you're going to flip a home, I wish you luck. But if you're going to buy a home, you're going to live in there has never, ever in the history of mankind been a bad time to buy a home and live there 10 years, even during the Great Recession. So I encourage you, look at this. This is housing prices going back to 1960. We had a decline in the Great Recession, but this is not 2008. And now, I shouldn't have to sell you on that, but I'll put a couple of bullets. I stole these bullets from Batney. I thought they were fantastic. You know, again, we were in it. Do you remember some of the loan programs? The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Marina, Ninja, no ability to repay, put a mirror under their nose, you're qualified, 125 seconds. I mean, it was a lunacy. Oh my God, I remember doing events with New Century and all these crazy, crazy products. Those are gone. It's a different world. It was a flipper market. Young people want to buy a home. They don't want to buy a home and flip it. You know, it's just an entirely different world. I mean, it starts with, you know, even the underwriting standards alone. It's just a completely different world. So we're not going to see that. So don't wait. Oh. So this is Mortgage Market Guide site. And one of the things, wow, chart looks awesome on this screen. That is so cool. I want to take that home. What we do is we talk about the economy, all this stuff. And then the other thing you have to do is you have to look at what pricing's doing. You can't just go blindly float, block, or not know. When you combine it, that's the system. You got to look at all this stuff and you go, where's pricing? Because that's the most important thing. You could have the best story in the world, but if we're banging up against the ceiling and prices aren't going anywhere, you know, I have my sister next to me, I'm locking your loan. I don't care what you know, you're telling me. And here's a couple things I can tell you. One, do you remember where we were last August? It was miserable. Remember, prices go higher. This is mortgage-backed securities on the MMG site. As prices go higher, rates are going lower. This is the polar opposite of where we were last August. Prices were dropping. We were making lower lows and lower highs over time, which means we were going higher highs and higher lows in rate. It was miserable, and that's when April to October, we essentially went from 6% to 8% on 30-year mortgages. It was brutal. We are seeing the absolute polar opposite. Let's hope it ends in October and doesn't finish there. So here we are in April. We bottom out. It was an ugly process. One of the things I could tell you, when you're looking for a bottom, don't expect it to be shiny. It's going to knock on your door and say, yeah, Brittany, go ahead, float your pipeline. Things are great. You have to work through that, and it was ugly to watch. But once you get through it, I can tell you right now, you don't have to be a chart expert to see the trend is our friend. That is sideways, left to right, sloping higher. That's lower rates right now. But in the near term, look at the right side of the screen. Look at 102. That's 102 mortgage-backed securities. So think about where you are at rates right now. And it's a 6% coupon. We have not gotten above it one time. In fact, the peak, ironically, was back on the Friday. That was the jobs report. That was that jobs report, that green candle, the high green one on the right. Then the next day is that Monday where we went to 366 on the 10-year note, and we haven't gotten back there since. And so it's like the emotion of the market. And when you can combine this, say, if this were a stock, longer term, I'm like, okay, I'm not retiring. I'm fine. But if I needed that money next week, I would be selling it. So manage your pipeline that way. If you're closing in 90 days, you don't have to maybe take action, but if you're closing in a couple weeks, I wouldn't float my enemy there. Like I would be like, that's a little tough. You got to watch what's happening. And now, what do we have? Well, tomorrow we have this revision that's happening with the jobs report, like I told you. At 2 o'clock, we can get the minutes from the last Fed meeting. What are they going to say? Right, so there's a lot of risk. And then Friday, it's widely expected. And I say widely expected because the market's probably already priced it in, that the Fed is going to allude that they're going to cut rates. Just don't know by how much. So there were some hazards coming into this year, and they really did pan out. Like inflation has been a problem, and it's been from a lot of spending. Remember, Mr. Wonderful? He was on TV every 12 seconds with the ERC credit. Mr. Wonderful, Chef Wonderful, and I was like tired of looking at him. And all that money hasn't even hit the economy yet. So that's still out there. It's still coming, the employee retention credits. We had the union walkouts, more spending, debt, oil, and then a lot of this stuff is sticking with us. These are the things that I'm watching right now and I'm worried about. Debt's a problem because we don't have, we have to take the money we need to fund the government and we have to sell it in the bond market. And you worry at what price, right? I'm old enough to remember what happened in the periphery of Europe, where Greece and Portugal, they got priced out of the bond market. Their fiscal policy was like, wait, you have a math problem. You can't pay that money back. You're gonna have to get a higher rate. And it's no different than you would do to a borrower, right? You come to a borrower that's a mess. They don't have enough income. They got a ton of debt. They're looking like they're gonna take on more debt. You just wish them well, right? And even if I could do the loan, you're not gonna like the interest rate. And so that's kind of where we are now, right? Like we're borrowing on our name, the full faith and credit of the US government. But what at some point, does the market say, man, you can't pay this back? Like there's a math problem. And it's not the 35 trillion that we have. 35 trillion is a lot of money. And besides that, there's 18 trillion on the consumer side, right? We have 18 trillion amongst us on top of the 35. So you're talking $53 trillion in debt all over, which is a crazy amount of money. But it's the trajectory of the new debt, right? If you're putting on $1 trillion every 100 days, you got to pay for it somewhere. So we're going to find out. There's a lot out there, and I think it does point to us. Global uncertainty, election, obviously, these are going to be big, big factors for us going into the next few months. But what I'm looking at, and kind of like some of the punchline, is this is what we do every day for our subscribers. Help them with a market position. You should have one, right? Someone's going to ask you where rates headed, and if I knew that I would live on an island, it's probably not enough an answer. It was a question that deserves a response. And what's beautiful, like I did share today, you can talk to it. Where are rates headed? Well, I just showed you the chart. Near term, it's limited, right? The market has been on a nice run since October, and it's pausing after a few months of lower rates. Why? Well, I'll get into that in a second, but the longer term, the trend's lower. So you're buying a home next spring? I like the way things are happening. All signs are pointing to multiple Fed rate cuts by then. If the stars align, we're seeing inflation come down, unemployment is going up. These are all things that are great for mortgage rates. Fed rate cuts are coming. I do worry about debt. That can unnerve things, so that could give us a scenario where short-term rates come down, but long-term rates stay high because the problem that we have is selling the long-term debt. And then why do you say that, Mr. or Mrs. Loan Officer? Well, we had a 10-year note auction 2 weeks ago, and it didn't do well. It was the first one where the 10-year note was beneath 4%, and the market went like this. They stepped back, and they waited for the Treasury Department to give more yield. They said, I'm not buying at that. I'll buy you bonds, but at what price? And they commanded a higher interest rate, and that put the peak in mortgage rates, or the bottom, I should say, right? So we got to watch it. What's next? Dual mandate readings. You got to watch inflation. You have to watch the jobs reports are enormously important now. Fed speak and these auctions, right? So these are some of the things that we're watching. And blue skies, kind of like your skies here. It really is beautiful. A lot like in New Jersey. I laugh. I was telling Chad, it's like gray until May in New Jersey. It really is. I mean, it was really pretty out there. So here's the punchline. I mean, the worst is completely behind us. I mean, are we going to navigate through some stuff? Yeah, but the worst is behind us. There's less competition, unfortunately. I lost a lot of friends like you guys here on the mortgage side, real estate side. People want homes. The demand, it's the opposite of China. No one wants them in China, but they want them badly here. And the rate trend is our friend. I mean, the trend is our friend. That's probably one of the bigger takeaways. People want homes, and the trend's our friend, so it's coming our way. And then, you could see here, this is like Fannie Mae. 92%, the other day, 92% of consumers say owning a home is important. I would say in China right now, it's the polar opposite of that, right? And a couple more slides. Oh, selfish pitch, 1 second. I do have something for you. If you like some of this talk, we do a nice job. I've been doing it for a couple decades. We have thousands of folks with me a long time, and for a lot of years. This was, I don't do the Facebook thing, but I did get the alerts. You could have picked a better picture. But it did say, essentially, do you remember April 9th and 10th this year? It was really bad. Just to remind you, it was like a 4-rate sheet day. We had CPI, we had the Fed minutes, and we had a 10-year note auction. It was like the triple Lindy. And the bond market got clobbered. Whatever rate you thought you were quoting on the 9th was a distant memory on the 10th. It was bad. And we told our subscribers, like a chart like that, I said, the chart's terrible, it's peaking, and we got all this news. Like I just told you a moment ago, if I had my sister next to me and she was closing, there would be no way, like I wouldn't float my enemy going into that. And she locked, and she saved a bunch of people money and herself money. So that's what we do. You know? And so essentially Mortgage Market Guide is a product where you have myself in your corner, Pat, Karen, we do a daily update. We send you a video like this every day, live bond quotes, a newsletter we write every Wednesday or Thursday that goes out to your realtors. You can follow each other on LinkedIn. Please do. I share a lot of content on LinkedIn. I got a bunch of friends. I can always have more. I'd love you to connect. And then here's a little thing I want to do for you guys. So don't take my word for it. Just try it. Take it for 2 weeks. I have folks with us for a long, long time, like 20 years. Think about it. No one keeps a mortgage that long. There's probably no other piece of software you have for like 20 years. So it's really simple. It's $49 a month, but for today, take the code, take 2 weeks, type in the promotion code Utah10. You can have it for $39, quit any time, and it's a no-brainer. But at least take it for 2 weeks. Heck, it could help you over the next 3 days while we're navigating this lunacy that's going to take place between tomorrow's Fed, the revisions on the benchmark, as well as Friday's Jackson Hole. So I thank you. I'd love to take some questions. Yes, sir.
So with the low inventory, there's a huge pent-up demand. And as interest rates come down, there's a fear that home prices will rise, and there will be another bidding war again, and those two factors will offset each other. What's your opinion on that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a valid concern. I'm with you. And that's why I don't want to see a shock. I want to see it come down steadily. What would offset that is what I shared before, some of that higher unemployment. Like if the low rates come at some higher unemployment, that's going to pull some of the demand. Can't buy a home. If we lose another 2 million jobs, right? We get unemployment rate north of 6%. It's going to thin some of this discussion out quickly. Like, I can't think about buying a home if I can't find a job. And, you know, and that kind of malaise, it doesn't mean we're going to have a bad housing market. To the contrary, I think it would be more healthy. So I think some of that might offset each other, but I am concerned, and that's why this, again, I'm going to tiptoe, because supposedly we're all at odds with each other. But this $25,000 first-time homebuyer thing It's really nice that Kamala Harris wants to put out there, Vice President Harris wants to put out there to buy for first-time home buyers. It's a wonderful political point. It's going to get people, but from a policy, from a fiscal standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to me from a free market thing. And I think that thing, we don't know what we don't know. But what we do know is you're throwing money at it. We don't have a problem with demand. We have a problem with supply. We don't need to spark the demand side. We know all these youngsters want to buy a home. Make them cheaper. Figure out how to, I mean, a lot of it's state and local. How do we get someone to build, I think you mentioned it before, how do you get someone to put the shovel in the ground without an act of Congress? Where I live in New Jersey, it is like you literally, it's like an act of God to build a home and a lot of money. And so no wonder why in California where you are, it's like the money to put a shovel in the ground, no wonder why they're not building. Make it easier. We need 4 million homes. If we're only building one and change, do the math. We got like 3 to 4 years of building just to get anywhere near the supply that we need. Yes, sir.
I want to go on top of that. If you go up to 6% unemployment rate, we're heading back into the same thing we had back in the 80s when I was doing REOs and selling foreclosed real estate. So you're going to have a balancing effect when the banks start to take these homes back and the investors start to take these homes back. They're going to come back on the market to drive pricing back down again on these homes.
Yeah, absolutely some of that. And I think it's where you can almost see it, like some of that coming if it gets up there. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the inverted yield curve. It seems like it's been inverted probably the longest time.
Yes, in history, yeah.
So is there any correlation to the length of time of a potential recession as far as the length or severity of the recession, or is it based off of the...
No, there's not. And and this one is a little weird because again, there were so many dislocations. The Fed raised rates at the quickest pace like ever. And then we showered the earth with cash, which allowed people to spend, which averted the recession. But at the end of the day, I always go back to the bond market always seems to be the smartest person in the room. And you're watching, I showed you the charts, it's going to tell us again, right? The Fed funds futures is different. That's been wrong. By the way, the Fed's been right there. Like if you watch the Fed funds futures, over the last 3 years, they've been really incorrect. Like on the way up, I didn't think the Fed could raise rates as much as they did. But now I'm actually thinking like, well, maybe they shouldn't have. Because maybe the things aren't as good. We're starting to get these backward revisions, removing 1 million jobs. That means we should have been cutting months ago, right? We're already behind the curve on that. So yeah, as far as the size of the recession, I don't know that it would even be, it's tough to say. I mean, I don't know that it would be bad. It's a different economy. People are a little bit more well-heeled. We need some better fiscal policy. We need people to put capital at risk. I'm not hearing any of that right now. I want to hear someone say, this is why you do this, tax credit, hire people. We need small businesses putting on the jobs. That's what we need. And by the way, the other thing, and I shared this at the last talk, what's crazy is what could avert the recession is our world. Housing is what, 18% of the economy? Can you imagine we start selling homes? Look at Lowe's and Home Depot. Their earnings are terrible, right? Those things change dramatically when you start selling property. So let's hope that we're successful. We get some decline in rates. I mean, now you see, like I shared in the other group, maybe I said it earlier, forgive me if I repeat myself, but the idea that we're going to get a recession, or I should say a soft landing, would be complete luck. Like for the Fed to get a soft landing, you can't engineer that. They're not that good. It's going to be complete luck. So you see what has to happen. Just up right there, a lift in unemployment, inflation comes down, the economy just coasts, and it just, man, you got to get the stars to align. Yes, ma'am.
So I was just going to ask that question. And the revised numbers, isn't that kind of what they're doing? I mean, they're setting the narrative's not where they need it, so they're revising the numbers.
The numbers aren't good. And I hate to say, I don't want to be the whole conspiracy thing, because I think all politicians kind of fudge the numbers. This one seems a little egregious. And even Powell could almost barely say it with a straight face. He almost smirked like, the numbers are kind of overstated. They're really overstated, right? And there's always been kind of pressing on the scale. But what I worry about, and again, I just keep it simple. If we know the jobs numbers are not good, and I just showed you the inflation, like we went from high inflation to evaporated. I was like, what happened? It's like, well, what other numbers are you going to make fun of? And so that's why, like, the bond market is a little simpler, and looking at it and saying, that's why the yield curve is inverted. You guys are telling us things are great, but the yield curve has been inverted for 2 years. So the bond market is telling us, no, it's not as good as things are. And now we're going to find out, maybe in a hurry, starting tomorrow, right? Can you imagine they say 600,000 jobs, that's 50,000 less jobs per month. That's a big number, right? When you're only putting on 175, we need 115 just to mop up immigration and people like my kids entering the labor pool. So it's changing quick. And that's how this happens. It's like, like they say bankruptcy. It happens slow and then all of a sudden, like we're standing around, things are great, and all of a sudden, what the heck just happened? Like now we're talking recession, the economy was great, we're putting on 15 million jobs. And all of a sudden, it's not that. So that's what's happening. It's a wild moment in time. Yes?
What about the trillion in spending every 90 days?
Yeah, it's terrible.
Trillion in debt. How will
It's terrible.
how do you
It's terrible, and it's real simple. You can look at there's some great, who's bubbling up right now? Google some Milton Friedman videos. He was really something. He was a piece of work, but man, he was a straight talker, and he laid it out there. It's just too much money chasing too few goods. It's just not that hard, right? If you have too much money, look, we threw money around there. Everybody wanted to go on vacation. Anybody want to put a pool in during COVID, right? You couldn't get one, and if you wanted one, it was so expensive, right? We had to live through that. So there's different sources, but that was because we all had money, and then we had the demand, but we didn't have enough supply. We need home, and it's just that piece is crazy because we have to sell the debt. If we have to sell the debt and it's at higher interest rates, and that goes across the country, everything's more expensive. If you can't lower interest rates, the other thing is energy, right? We talk about where we are now with oil at $75. Another thing that we don't talk about that I've been speaking about lately and last night at dinner, electricity. Electricity is expensive. It's gone up a lot, and it's everywhere. And we're talking about price gouging. Well, a supermarket has no margin. They're fighting 1% to 3%. That's all they make. It's all volume. But they have electricity. They have higher wages, all this stuff. He goes, it isn't like supermarkets are colluding to lower prices. It's a free market. Figure out something else. We need energy to come down. We need energy at like 50-50. Again, I look, BC, pre-COVID, was $50. And we were spending under $2 a gallon. Life was wonderful. Inflation was 1.4%. We need to get back to something close to that, because the idea that we're not going to use oil is crazy. Of course it's going to happen. And then the other thing was diesel, right? Diesel was $7 a barrel. I mean, oh my God, $7 a gallon. It was crazy. I mean, that's why it's everywhere. It's throughout the food chain. So all the food, how can you get lower food prices? You can't tell you, stop raising your prices. Look around. I mean, everything's expensive. And so we're getting through it. I mean, the good news is it's coming our way, but I would love to see lower energy prices. I think that makes the inflation story go away pretty rapidly, because that hits everything, right? It hits everything in one big stroke, especially housing. Everything in housing is oil. If it stays at $90, how do you get a lower price of a home? The roofing, the shipping, I mean, everything's oil. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, I got a question. When you talk about debt, and we've heard, the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. Is there any concern? There's been talk about moving away from that. What would that do to the U.S.?
Great question. And that's why you see cryptos, because of all the promises of government, fiat currencies, I'll pay you back, it's all IOUs and stuff. We're not going to lose our reserve status now, but what's scary, Chad, there's a lot of bad actors out there that are kind of colluding, and they all have the oil, right? It's like, we got to buy oil from these clowns. It's like, let's just do our own thing. Let's get a nice, strong economy, and everything else will figure itself out, right? We need a strong economy, and the dollar remains strong. And I don't see where we lose a reserve status, but if it were to happen, it would probably be pretty bad. It would probably be pretty bad, because all the commodities are priced in oil and dollars. Oil is priced in dollars. So, if the dollar goes down, oil prices have to go up. That's another thing, by the way, we have to watch. Probably one reason why the Fed wants to slow roll it. Again, I'm just riffing here, but if the Fed starts cutting rates, that makes the dollar weaker, and that could actually put upward pressure on oil. One of the reasons why oil has come down is because the dollar is so strong. But if they have to release that because the economy's hitting the skids, well, that could actually put upward pressure on commodities. But right now, because of China, oil prices, commodity prices are coming down because they don't even want to build a house in China. They went from building like crazy to they're trying to knock them down. They need to get rid of their, we should go to China. We want to fix our housing problem? Let's go over there and bring them over and plant them somewhere in the Midwest and put some people out here because they don't want their homes. Yeah, it's pretty wild what we're watching right now. Any other questions? No? Yes?
It's kind of a loaded one, but do you see the election impacting any of your predictions?
Elections always have consequences. That's what they say, right? They really do. They really do. One of the things I want to see for sure, whoever wins, you have to spend less. I mean, and no one wants to touch it, doesn't win votes, but we're doing it. We're looking around the room, everybody, I've been talking at the last meeting, and we're talking about changing
There's no
supermarkets.
Starbucks here.
What?
There's no Starbucks here.
Yeah,
I figured it out.
that's right. Yeah, no, I'm telling you, yeah, we're all doing it, and we have to kind of figure that out. And the other thing I want to see is the low energy prices, and I'd love to see a growth policy. I want to see someone say, you know what, I'm going to put my money on the table and start hiring. And I haven't heard that yet. Like, what's going to inspire somebody to go hire people? Like, there are things you can do to make somebody, I want to hire you, get in the boat, we're going to start a business, and I got this kind of, small business initiative. We need small businesses, and I don't like that they're blowing up. It's too expensive, right? So I'd like to see that. But right now, and whatever happens, like if there's more debt, I worry that could put a lid on how much better rates can get, unless, we have a bad time with the economy. There's so many moving parts. There's no one magic bullet. But I'd like to see growth policies, and I wouldn't consider a growth policy inflationary. I consider a growth policy good for inflation, because if I produce more goods, that lowers the price supply side. Don't just hand somebody $25,000 and say, go buy a home. We have no demand problem. We have a house problem. The guy that's running, or the gal that's running, should say, this is how we're going to spin up 1 million homes and make it affordable. Don't just throw around money, because we could sell it tomorrow. We just need more of them to sell.
We already have money we can throw at them. Every state has.
Yeah. Any more questions? No? Well, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Okay, one more round of applause for Bill.
Thank you.
Fantastic information. I hope the biggest takeaway in these types of meetings that we have is please know the data, know your numbers, understand what moving parts affect interest rates. And so when you're having those conversations with your clients, when you're having those conversations with your realtor partners or whomever you're speaking with, you have reasoning to come other than, yeah, rates are high, or oh, rates are going down, or oh, they're cutting it 6 times this year, right? So super important to know this information. Please check out Bill's mortgage marketing group.
Mortgage Market Guide, yes.
Mortgage Market Guide.
Right on.
For more information, try that 14-day trial, see how that helps you, what resources that gives you.